All right, we're going to have a down-to-earth conversation tonight about some things that have been happening this week. Welcome into My State of Mind. As you might know if you watch the show on any regular basis, and thankfully so many of you are, the numbers continue to grow, and I appreciate that. On Friday evenings, we tend to kind of spread it out a little bit because, don't tell anybody, we record the Friday shows on Thursday afternoon. And so we skip the commentary on today's news, and we kind of broaden out some conversations, albeit hopefully fun, entertaining, or compelling, or important, depending on how the cycle has been going. And clearly, with the terror attack, now that we know it's a terror attack of some kind of flavor in California, with the politics of terror and Donald Trump's reaction to it, as if he owns the political scene, and for some reason, we in the media have allowed that to do that. There's been a lot of reaction, and the radio lines on WPRO, where you can hear my radio show weekdays, noon to 3, and throughout Talk Radio America, have been pounding away with, I think, a lot of misunderstanding. Never mind your loyalty or not to Donald Trump, I think there's a lot of relationship opportunity that we can have here with Muslim Americans, and some honest conversation back and forth about what's been going on. And so this week, we've been trying to do that with the last few shows. Note, coming up on the Monday program, we will talk to the Rhode Island Truckers Association about the truck toll bill. So we will be switching gears. But tonight, I've got a couple of cool guests, and I'm going to introduce you to them in just a second. But first, here's kind of a scene setter from this week that kind of talks about the challenges today.
As soon as word spread that radicalized Muslims orchestrated the mass shooting in San Bernardino,
I hope you all leave this country.
Tension that had been building since the Paris attack, for some, boiled over. This phone call was made to the Dallas chapter of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations.
You're not welcome here. I hope you get sprayed with pig's blood.
And the way that Muslims are being portrayed right now, it's worse than 9/11.
Omer Siddiqui was just a child then. He says his parents protected him from much of the backlash. But he is a man now, living in anxious times. A trip to the grocery store led to this confrontation just 2 days ago.
And he's like, "Are you Muslim?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Muslim." He just started getting angry, cursing. He's like, "You should just go back to where you came from." Then I was like, "I'm from Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago." And he just kind of got stuck. He didn't know what to say. And then he just said, "F you all Muslims." And he just kind of walked off.
CARE says the organization is seeing a spike in threats and harassment of Muslims not seen since 9/11. The situation has gotten so bad that some imams are encouraging Muslim women to cover their heads with something other than the traditional hijab, fearing they will be targeted.
And a woman basically was trying to flag me down from her vehicle.
Aya Sayed of Fort Worth already has.
She rolls down her window and she starts spewing derogatory language, and she spit from her vehicle to my vehicle.
There's that few people that will attack us and say hateful things, but then we got the people that are supporting us with love, kind words, and we just need to see a lot more of that.
Alrighty, back here. Adrian Wood Smith is an associate chaplain for the Muslim community at Brown University. Welcome. Nice to have you.
It's great to be here.
And Imam Fareed Ansari is the president of the Rhode Island Council for Muslim Advancement. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Don.
Gut check reaction to that, either one of you, before I start asking all sorts of silly questions?
We're suffering as a community. I think we see this pattern again and again. The Muslim community in America and throughout the world is suffering, and then things are put forth as if we're the problem and we deserve this kind of treatment.
Well, clearly there's been a climate change,
Right.
both literally and figuratively, particularly when it comes to the Muslim community. The Muslim community has been growing unfettered by any of this hysteria and misinformation and mistreatment, and it's just something that's clearly a dangerous precedent being put forth, particularly with the current presidential candidate calling for the banning of Muslims to come to the United States, which to me is outrageous.
I'm guessing you feel the same way.
Yes, definitely.
Well, we're going to preach to each other's choir here because I too feel like it's outrageous. But I think there are other questions that we can ask. At some juncture, Donald Trump will become super relevant or irrelevant. I'm not sure which way it's going to go. You care to guess as to which way that's going to go?
I tend to guess on hope, so I hope that this fizzles out and this is the beginning of the end.
Same here. I honestly don't believe that the core of Americans and American values are in agreement with what Donald Trump is advocating. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, we've got an angry and an anxious electorate right now. Angry at what they perceive to be a lack of leadership. We can have that political discussion or pass on it. And nervous. And California is certainly, brought back all of the anxiety. Paris, then California. Never mind 9/11. I think we all get that. I'm concerned about a couple of things. First of all, on the radio lines, I get a general sense that folks really don't know much about Islam. They don't know much about the Islamic American community. They rely maybe on a couple of headlines and some web stints and maybe a couple of sound bites from the CARE organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which frankly I'm not doing cartwheels over in terms of even their style and even what they did when the shooting occurred. I thought it was way too opportunistic and almost a violation of the investigation to bring a family member into that. So that's a practical concern for me. But at the same time, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for people who happen to be Islamic and live in this country and deserve all rights, liberties, responsibilities, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And right now, it feels like the heat's on, man. But I'm not here to say it. Are you here to say it? Is the heat on? You feel it?
Oh, we're feeling the heat.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, you talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the core values. These are the things that he should be talking about. And it's absent. You mentioned leadership. If this is what we resorting to as far as leadership of this country, we're in big trouble.
Well, look, again, away from Donald, I agree. But there's, listen, he's pressing some buttons.
Yeah.
And the buttons are being pressed, I think, in some ways, from a lack of orientation and a worry. I said to a guest a couple of nights ago, our political scientist from URI, I said, you drive by a church in Rhode Island, you don't think about anything about it. These days, if you're not a Muslim and you drive by a mosque, you go, what's going on in there? Do you know that?
Well, we're under scrutiny, no doubt about it. But if you come to a mosque, you should be seeing the practical application of Islam in practice and in deed. And we pray 5 times a day. I mean, it's not like it's perhaps the public don't know what Muslims practice. And education is very important. And we've reached out consistently in terms of trying to be more transparent, to make the public known as to what proper Islamic behavior is. Because when you look at what's happening with this ISIS, ISIL, and all of these terrorist acts, these are virtually criminals. Because if you look at the behavior,
virtually, they are criminals.
They are criminals.
Mass murderers in a death cult.
Exactly.
It's the simplest way we can put it. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, call a spade a spade. It is what it is. However, when you try to equate terrorism with Islam, then that's a big.
All right, so
I also think that much of the public doesn't understand what is behind all the rhetoric of equating Islam with terrorism. That in many communities, many different religious communities, for centuries, people have used their own whatever belief system, and they've grown up with whatever's salient to them, use that to justify the frustration and the frustration that then leads them to sometimes desperation and violence and that kind of thing. We find that throughout communities throughout the world. And so many studies have proven that the Muslim community, whether you're talking about American Muslim community or the Muslim community globally, isn't more prone to other communities than these expressions of violence. But everything is shown this way. I don't think a lot of the public realizes that there's since 2001, $57 million has been put into building this rhetoric, taking advantage of the times when people do crazy things murder people in the name of Islam.
$57 million from what source about what rhetoric?
If you look up the report, it's called Fear Incorporated
Exactly.
2.0. Some think tanks did some research on this and figured it's $57 million that several policy institutions have put into crafting the debate on this issue and making it seem like Muslims are the problem, Islam is the problem, and working in cooperation with politicians.
Okay, so we'll pause here. When we come back, we'll use the term radical Islamic terrorism and see what these guys think about it. Stay with us. So, guys, I say radical Islamic terrorism, and you say what?
I say, what does Islam have to do with it? It's being framed. Terrorism is terrorism. People terrorize people, and they're going to terrorize people and justify it to themselves based on what's most salient to them and their values, and because that's kind of the core of how they're able to then demonize and otherize people.
This is a specific vocabulary that has been developed by these same people that you made reference to. This is so-called Islamophobics. This same group that he referred to has crafted that language. Terrorists, fundamentalists, jihadists, radical Islamic terrorists, all this is the language that has emerged from that various groups in order to sensationalize this type of behavior and then try to equal that with Islam, which of course it is just the reverse.
Well, here's the interesting part of it. We've got presidential candidates that are dancing around the term. We've got criticism of the president for not using the term. Hillary Clinton can't get there either because she's kind of hedging her bets or thinking through, depending. But most of the candidates, in addition to Donald Trump on the Republican side, are using the term, suggesting that if you can't use the term, you can't talk candidly about what's going on out there. Yet, as the term is being used, there is a byproduct of that they try to explain, which is that doesn't mean Islam, that means the radicalization of Islam. And now we get reports that these two shooters in California were radicalized over a period of time between 2012 and 2016. And everybody's trying to figure out, really, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
Good question. Good question. I mean, I don't know what that necessarily means, but it suggests that this is possible or that it's going to happen and that it's going to happen here in America. When you look at the American Muslim community, the radicalization of Islamic practitioners. I do work in the prisons. There was a report about the radicalization of prisoners by the chaplains that are teaching Islam in the prisons. Well, it couldn't be nothing further from the truth. If anything, I try to teach them the ethics of Islam and the proper practice of Islam. And this is what we're teaching in the mosque. It's not a question of the radicalization. If anything, we're speaking out against, ignorance.
So I would push back a bit, Imam Farid. I know I love you, and we're on the same page on a lot of things. But I mean, I would be honest about our community that people are being radicalized. I know people who've gotten into this mentality, and I wasn't able to intervene and kind of help get them out of that mentality. But it's not an Islamic thing. People are radicalized in all kinds of different communities. When a Christian goes and chooses to bomb an abortion clinic and says this is because abortion is murder and these people need to die who are participating in this murder, we don't label it Christian terrorism. But it's the same phenomenon. It's people feeling desperate for whatever reason and then justifying their own desperation and their own turning to violent acts. And I think most people in America don't realize that there are three groups of people who are working together, really. Or I don't even know if they even realize that they're working together. We have this Islamophobia lobby that's pouring millions of dollars, $57 million into the debate to frame the debate this way.
Yes.
You have politicians who don't really have anything substantial to say, except that when this term comes up, Islamic terrorism, there's a scare, then they take advantage of that say it's a bait and switch. They don't have any real policies, but we say, oh, but we're going to be tough against the Muslims, and everyone gets on with them, and forgets that they don't actually have any real policies. And just studies show as well that that the public opinion in America, the public opinion in America of Muslims in general, Americans' opinion of Muslims, it goes down 15%. According to the election cycles. When there are election cycles, it goes down 15%. Americans have a less favorable view of Muslims. It doesn't go down when there are terrorist attacks, when they're not in an election cycle. So so we have the politicians, we have the lobbyists, the Islamophobia lobby, and then we have the radicalized Muslims who buy into this whole rhetoric and use that rhetoric to convince impressionable young people who don't really know anything about Islam, but want to do something about the things in the world.
All right. So it's
This dichotomy.
This is fascinating. I'm going to ask you guys to come on the radio for a longer conversation. But
I'd love to.
Explain what happens, or what your theory is on what happens when a God-fearing, God-loving, normal citizen who happens to be Muslim becomes radicalized. What part of the Quran, what aspect of Sharia law, what is it, do you think, is the mechanism that creates a transformation into this terror disposition, or this violent disposition, or this Al-Qaeda and or ISIS-like political position? What happens?
There's nothing inherent to the Quran or Sharia that leads someone to that. That one can take any. I can go read the Bible. I know my colleagues in religious studies at Brown. They've led open forums about this. That if you look at the Bible, there's as much violent rhetoric in the Bible as there is in the Quran. The Quran talks about using force to seek justice. The just war theory, in terms of if people are being oppressed, then it's incumbent upon leaders of communities to stand up for the oppressed, and that sometimes means
so what's
using
the
means.
perversion of the teaching generated from?
Ignorance. I mean, that's the perversion in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, it's got to be more than that. There's got to be more motive than that. I'm not talking about Americans misunderstanding. I'm talking about terror motive, ISIS motive, Al-Qaeda motive. What's generating this perversion of Islamic teaching?
Political power. That's what I believe, because there's no basis in the Quran for that type of behavior. If you look at the prophets, the history of the prophet, peace be upon him, whereby even when he was being persecuted in Mecca, he never resorted to this type of behavior under any circumstances. This terrorist action. So as using that as a model, using him, and that's what we should emulate his behavior. And nowhere in the seerah or the history of the prophet where he engaged in this type of behavior.
Right. I know you could go on all day about this, but I want to talk about the relationship between the American Muslim community and America, and the marketing and the public relations back and forth, and now you do too, and we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. All right, welcome back in. My guests are fascinating, don't you agree? And we all agree that we need to have more of this conversation. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I'm not apologizing for this conversation. The more informed you are, the better decisions you're going to make about the politics of the day. Okay, so I'm not yelling at you. I'm just suggesting that these conversations are going to be important. And by the way, theology is a fascinating conversation. You know, for me, and I think most people think it's fascinating too. Adrian, you before we started the show today, you said, listen, I want to be able to talk about your assertion that the American Muslims aren't doing enough. I don't think you guys are doing enough.
Well,
I don't think you're doing enough to, you're a couple of guys I could have a beer with. You may not have one with me, but you know what? I know that. I know I'm kidding. I've got a good Muslim friend who plays golf with me, and we joke about that all the time. By the way, he's got a hell of a swing. But I don't think you're doing enough.
Okay. I mean, so I understand how you would have that perspective based on how media works these days, how social media is, how easy it is for us to get siloed, and just hearing the kind of things that tend to go along with our perspective and what we've already heard already. But I've seen myself firsthand, and then many of my friends in the Muslim community have written articles about this, tried to voice their frustration with this. That time and again, Muslims are reaching out. They're speaking out against terrorism in any form. There's a worldwide global letter to al-Baghdadi, a letter addressed to the leader of the Islamic State from Muslim scholars and leaders throughout the world. It's online. You can read the whole thing. You can read who signed on to it. That's gotten hardly any coverage. So letter breaks down all of his points, says why he needs to. Why he needs
you know
to
what
stop
though?
and all
You
that.
know, guess what? In America and in the free world, you need drama. Yeah, you know. So if you're going to sit here and play an intellectual game and or a, you know, mid-flow social media, you know, if you're smart, you'll follow us and you'll understand what the heck is going on. I think you lose. You're either you guys are going to engage in the same kind of equitable media grab that the Donald Trumps of the world are. Of course, there's a sensibility about that you don't have to repeat the behavior to grab the attention. But you know, I invited you,
Right.
and I'll keep inviting you. But no one's ringing my phone saying, "Hey, Chubby, we got to get on the television right now and talk to our community about what's going on." And I just think that while this is the third show this week I've done on this, you guys are cooperative and appreciative, and I'm appreciative and cooperative. But guess what? You're not ringing my phone. And I think that's being replicated in communities and media all across America, never mind on the network and national basis. Your thought on that?
Yeah, you know, I'm no stranger to, I believe, the Rhode Island public. I've addressed the public on numerous occasions. I've attempted to have outreach and do outreach. In fact, we're planning to do an additional effort to make outreach and do outreach to the community. So I'm not a stranger to this. Every opportunity that I have, I definitely will seek out to educate, to inform the people, particularly the Rhode Island public, about Islam. Every opportunity.
And I believe
that
that's
have.
genuine, but what I'm talking about is a marketing plan, man.
I mean, that's right,
Okay.
but it's hard to compete against $57 million. I mean, we're not a huge community in America, and yet there's at least huge funding against us. And we can't be everything at once. We have to take care of our own communities too. People are suffering. I here as a chaplain in the university.
Suffering how? I only have a
Just
minute.
at the backlash from what's happened in the past week or two. Friend of mine, her mother is a doctor in California. She was verbally abused in the parking lot outside of her work. Another friend of mine, she has a friend in Boston, got on the bus, going to class. She's a graduate student. She wears the headscarf. Got on the bus with her bag. One person turned to her and said, "Is there a bomb in that bag?" She had to empty out the contents of her bag. No one on the bus said anything.
Fear, anxiety, fear, anxiety, fear, anxiety in America today.
Yeah.
And violence.
violence.
The people, there are Muslims who've been killed so far in the past few weeks because of this. Been beaten up. All of these things.
And you would think that, considering the fact that there's such a thing as hate crimes, that Donald Trump will be held accountable for what he utters to ferment this type of.
Well, we'll leave on that thought. Come see me on the radio and come back here when the news requires it. Okay?
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
You're frustrated?
I mean,
Yeah, you're frustrated. A good show leaves you frustrated.
But I really appreciate you bringing
Yeah,
us on.
definitely.
Final word. Your feedback, radio, Monday. We'll have a lot of these conversations during this political cycle. On the Monday program, the Rhode Island Truckers Association on the truck toll program. Update it. You have a great weekend. Thanks. Bye.